issues to talk about.
Good afternoon and welcome. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. Joining NCAA President Mark Emmert today is Kirk Schultz, NCAA Board of Governors Chair and Kansas State University President, and Harris Pastides, NCAA Division I Board of Directors Chair and University of South Carolina President. With that, I'll turn it over to President Emmert.
Let me also thank you for joining us today. It's obviously another exciting Final Four. We're extremely pleased with the field of 4 teams that are here. They're remarkable programs, and I'm sure we're going to have a really fabulous finish to this tournament that's already been pretty extraordinary. You have to forgive me, I have a bit of a cold and a bit of a cough. But we've also had here in Indiana a number of issues that have in some ways overshadowed the tournament. And I'm obviously talking about the debate that's going on literally as we speak around the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. I and other members of the association have offered opinions about it in the past few days. We are now awaiting the potential revision of that bill. The House and Senate are working on it right now. The leadership of both of those bodies has been very forthright in saying that they need to get it changed earlier today, and we're certainly very hopeful that they will and believe that it absolutely positively needs to get fixed. It's a bill that creates an environment within which college athletics would find it very difficult to operate. And with that, I'd be happy to stop. I know you have lots of questions on lots of issues. We'd be happy to talk about the issues of RFRA if you'd like as well, but we're right now pretty much in a wait-and-see position. So, Bob, do you want to handle this?
So we have folks handling the microphones. Please state your name and media affiliation. Thank you.
Thanks. Jack Renault with CBS News. Dr. Emmert, on the RFRA bill, did the NCAA reach out to legislators to ask them to get this fixed as soon as possible? And how important is it for you to get this out of the way before tomorrow and Saturday games begin?
Yes, we did, in fact, reach out to legislators. I talked to the governor, to the Speaker of the House, worked with the mayor, worked with business leaders here in town. They were consulting with us around language changes that may or may not be sufficient to fix this bill. We made very clear that we wanted this resolved as quickly as possible. Now, this bill is more important than a basketball tournament. This is a bill that establishes the legal environment for people in the state of Indiana. Are we happy that this debate's occurring during the middle of Final Four week? Of course not. It would have been a lot easier to have it some other day. But we hope they can resolve it quickly, not just because of this event, but because it's an important issue to get the law right on and to get it right fast.
Hi, I'm Lori Jane Glehoff from Al Jazeera America. The NCAA has penalties for violations like academic misconduct, using drugs, accepting money for autographs. Why doesn't it have sanctions against players who are found responsible for a sexual assault, especially when some of those players are able to move on, transfer to a new school, and continue playing?
One of the first principles, and I'll let the presidents on either side also answer that question, because it's a very important topic right now and always has been. The first responsibility for student behavior that's not part of the competitive environment resides with campuses themselves. So when a student, whether they're a student athlete or not, is engaged in behavior that's inconsistent with the values of that university, then every university and college has a set of protocols for handling disciplinary matters. And so the members of the association, all the universities, have decided that those decisions, first and foremost, must be handled by the institutions themselves. If it's a criminal offense, then by the legal system of that state. If there is evidence that a university handled one of those cases in a way that is different than the way they would handle a non-athlete, in other words, there was a student athlete that was engaged in some inappropriate or criminal behavior, and the university treated that person differently than they would have if that person was just a regular student, then that is in fact an NCAA violation, and then in fact the association gets involved in trying to determine what the ramifications of that behavior would be. So it's not that the national rules don't have a policy about it, it's that they first and foremost reside with the campuses, and Kirk or Harris, you might want to add to that.
Go ahead, Harris.
Well, that's exactly right. Just like academic affairs, the universities are the primary responsible party. I think the NCAA would be watchful about how a university handled a particular issue with the student athlete, but we don't expect our colleagues from Indianapolis to be telling us how to handle a student on an academic matter or on a very serious criminal matter like you mentioned. So we're governed by state and federal policy and, of course, by our own university policy.
Andy Katz from ESPN. This is for Harris. Two parts here. Number one, since technically Mark Emmert works for the Board of Governors, how have you advised him and the NCAA how to handle the situation here in Indiana in terms of relocation or any kind of threats of moving in events? And then secondly, how have you at the University of South Carolina handled the way the NCAA has approached not putting official championships in your state because of the Confederate flag at your state capitol?
Well, first of all, just to clarify, Mark reports to the Board of Governors, chaired by Kirk, but I'm happy to tell you that from when we first heard the Division I board about what was happening in this state, Mark was very proactive, told us in no uncertain terms about how he would participate in trying to make it extremely clear that the statute that was being promulgated was antithetical to what was right for student athletes and that we wouldn't stand for it, and he had the Division I board's complete support. There are other thorny issues, of course, all over the United States, including in South Carolina with the flag. We abide by the rules that are promulgated by my own board and by the D1 Board of Governors. We're proud to have our women's basketball team in Tampa participating in the Final Four, but ultimately, what happened here in Indiana, I believe that there are about 20 other states that have RFRA type laws, but when they begin to infringe when they begin to oppose the overarching commitment to inclusiveness that we have on our campus and throughout the NCAA, it's time to speak up. So we were very proud of how our president handled it.
Yeah, I would say Mark and I have been in communication on a daily basis, sometimes a couple times a day through a variety of communications. We probably talked every other day about this. The Board of Governors will be meeting later this month, and this whole topic will be a major part of our agenda. We need to wait and see what happens over in the State House to know how we'll respond, but we're keeping tabs on this, and I want to applaud Mark and his leadership at putting out a very strong statement from the NCAA almost immediately that really said that we're just not going to tolerate any kind of ability for any student athlete, regardless of their background, their race, their sexual orientation, not being completely accepted at any of our championships.
Nancy Armour, USA Today Sports. Mark, did you have any pause about issuing the statement as early as you did? And I know you're in somewhat of a wait-and-see position, but will the NCAA work with legislators or encourage legislators to pass or include sexual orientation in the protected class for Indiana, which there currently is not a law that covers that?
Well, no, I wasn't hesitant about the speed with which we made the commitment. We were aware, of course, that the bill was working its way through the legislature. We were all surprised about the speed with which it came about and the speed with which the governor signed it, so we were a little bit caught off guard by that. But the reality that no one could offer any reassurance that this bill would not would not protect people from, excuse me, discriminatory acts based upon sexual orientation or gender identity was completely inconsistent with all of the things that I know the membership values as a recovering university president. Then, as you just heard, I immediately was in touch with the leadership of our boards. And so there really wasn't a lot of reason to debate it further. We were quite clear about what it meant and what it didn't mean. And so we came out fairly early in this process, and we were hopeful that could instigate some change. And while we don't want to, overplay the role that we had in it, we were pleased that the legislative bodies and the governor and others have decided to respond, I think, appropriately. And again, we'll wait and see what the modification really looks like. But I think it was the right thing to do it quickly, and it seems to have had an appropriate impact. And there was a second part of your question, which I forget. I'm sorry.
Will you encourage legislators to consider adding sexual orientation and gender identity as a protected class under Indiana's anti-discrimination law?
It's something that I hope that we talk about in our meetings at the end of the month with the rest of our governing boards. I personally, this is just my own Mark Emmert's opinion, I personally hope that they do that. I believe it would be appropriate, and it's, again, consistent with the values of our office and our staff. But I'll solicit the views of our members. The NCAA is 1,100 colleges and universities. A significant number of them are religious-based institutions. And so we have complex views on complex questions. And we need to be mindful of the fact that we represent lots and lots of schools, while at the same time holding strong on those issues that are fundamental core values of higher education.
I will say, I think the NCAA has appropriately in the past been critiqued for being slow to respond to things. And I think this was one of those cases that if we had spent 3 or 4 days talking to everybody, deciding on a response, putting together a joint statement, everybody would have said, well, gee, the NCAA's got this major event, one of our marquee events of the year occurring, and couldn't even take a public stand on this. So this is one of those times where I believe the rapid, quick, decisive communication out from the NCAA office by Mark and our staff was exactly where we needed to be.
Yes, Bob Kravitz with WTHR in Indianapolis. You've talked about tolerance and inclusion as it relates to RFRA. Now, you've got a couple of Final Fours heading down to Texas, which prohibits gay marriage, and I wonder if you will take any kind of political stand on that issue. Do you have any misgivings about having the Final Four in Texas?
Well, we've had tournaments in a number of the states that do have RFRA laws. As you know, there's, 20 or so of them around the country. They are variable in their language. Some states have language around civil rights protections that vary from one state to another. And of course, as you point out, there's varying positions on gay marriage, same-sex marriage. And so the association has historically not taken a stand on that issue. I think it's something that we will once again have to talk about among the membership when our boards get together to discuss these issues and decide at what point at what level should we become involved in civil debates inside these communities. The issue here was one that was, first of all, near and dear to us because we have 500 employees in this state. We, among other things, run the enterprise from here. We have to attract and retain a very diverse workforce. We have to have an environment that's attractive to people of all walks of life. We have a particularly young staff, and these issues for young people are very, very different than they are for old codgers like me. And the fact is we have to have an environment that works for us to conduct our affairs. Secondly, the issue is that no one could provide clarity about whether or not this law, including the governor, could not provide clarity on whether or not this law would allow individuals or organizations to discriminate against people. I don't know the statutes in Texas or other places, but I think those are things as we go forward that as we make bid decisions about places we should take our tournaments that we're going to have to look deeper and harder at.
I would say 2 weeks ago, this was not have been on the Board of Governors' agenda at all to look at. Obviously, because of what's happened here, and regardless of what occurs eventually over in the State House, this is now going to be on our April agenda. And so questions like, should we look at any particular social issues in states that hold championships of any type, not just the Final Four, but any of the multitude of NCAA championships, will now be something that we're going to take a close look at. Clearly, we're going to want Mark and his leadership and his recommendations on what to do, but ultimately, we've got a board of presidents at Division I, II, and III that are going to be looking at this and trying to provide some guidelines back to the organization about what we think we need to be doing. So 2 weeks ago, not on the agenda. Certainly much, much more so a topic of discussion coming forward at the April meeting.
Dan Moriarty with CNN. This is for Dr. Emmert. The NCAA said in response to the UNC lawsuit, it doesn't control the quality of education for its student athletes. What is the NCAA responsible for in regards to student athletes if it's not responsible for their education and safety?
I think we need to be really clear that everybody that's involved in the education of student athletes has a critical role to play, including the NCAA. But it's a continuum of responsibilities, and everybody has a role to play in their different roles. So the National Association, the member universities and colleges have some time ago decided that their responsibilities for the National Association are to, first of all, set some floors about the minimum academic preparation that a young man or woman has to have to play sports. They've also said that there has to be measurements of progress toward degree, that they have to be demonstrating that they're actually working diligently toward their degree and making headway on it. They've established our graduation success rate measurements and then our APR measurements that I'm sure you're well aware of. So there's these broad overview measures that the association has established for schools. The national office monitors all of those. There's a whole chain of sanctions that can be imposed on schools that fail to meet those standards. Similarly, the membership has passed a series of rules around academic misconduct that are predominantly aimed at whether or not a student athlete is being provided benefits, quote, academic benefits, it's just the jargon of the business, impermissible benefits around academics. Are they provided with access to courses that nobody else is provided to? Are they provided with academic support that goes above and beyond what's allowed by the rules in a way that involves the engagement of the institution, a variety of things around that level. When you come down to what's going on in a classroom, that's where my colleagues on either side of me come to bear. So the academic quality of what's transpiring in a classroom, by definition and by fairly obvious practicality, that's managed first and foremost by the professor in the classroom, second by that person's department head, third by their dean, fourth by their provost, and finally by their president. You couldn't have, even if you wanted, and I can't imagine why anybody would want, a staff from a National Athletic Association going into a classroom and sitting and seeing how a physics class is being taught. That's certainly not a role that an association should be playing, and they don't play it whether it's the ABA or the AMA or any other accrediting body of a university. But the association has to play that first role very importantly and very effectively, and then it's ultimately up to universities to determine whether or not the courses for which they're giving credit, the degrees for which they're passing out diplomas, live up to the academic standards of higher education. And I may ask either of these folks to comment.
Yeah, I have no desire at Kansas State University to have the NCAA more involved in our academic enterprise. It's the responsibility of the institutions and the academic leadership of those institutions to ensure that we're offering quality degree programs for everybody. And that we're not parking our student athletes over in some particular area or program that's not academically rigorous and doesn't allow them to be successful. One of the things that so often all of us have to remember is the huge majority of the student athletes go on to careers and become doctors and lawyers and engineers and things like that, are not going to play professional athletics, and we are obligated to do a great job preparing them for those career pathways. I think we can pick individual instances out, and you can look at particular institutions that have done one thing or another. Anytime something like this happens, it causes all of us to go look at our own institutions and say to our own people, can you tell me that we're doing a great job with our students, our student athletes? And I think many of us have been reflective to make sure that something that might happen to another great world-class university doesn't happen at our particular institution. So it's a constant thing that we've got to look at, but it's not just student athletes. It's all of our students deserve, they're going to pay that tuition to get a great degree experience that's going to prepare them for the workplace.
Eddie Pels from AP. I'd put this out to Mark and anyone who wants to answer. You talked about kind of being proactive, getting ahead of the game on the things that are going on in Indiana. Some of the issues that the NCAA has been dealing with over the last year or so, you know, Big Five autonomy, kind of the amount of the pie that players should be able to get, some of the lawsuits, things like that. Do you think the NCAA is built for you to set an agenda on those, or do you feel like you're always playing defense?
Well, I'll let these gentlemen answer, and then I'll respond as well.
Well, let me start by saying the NCAA is comprised of universities, hundreds of universities, representing in D1 alone nearly 500,000 student athletes. I think we've made terrific progress, but it's only a beginning. I think we deserve the time to see how both governance reform and autonomy plays out. I could tell you from the side of the Southeastern Conference that it's not easy to figure it out completely. I can tell you that it's expensive. I can tell you that over 90% of the money that the NCAA takes in goes out directly to universities. And so I think the NCAA has taken a very large step forward. It's not the last step that we're going to take. And I would also say that a lot of the critics out there, whether they are in the press, the government, or the general public, haven't quite fully digested the steps we've taken. When I go out and talk at Rotaries, for example, or even in the state legislature about what we're doing now to take better care of our student athletes and alumni, varsity athlete alumni, they're quite impressed. But I think we deserve an opportunity, another year or two, to figure out how well it's working.
I can tell you I'm tired of playing defense. We've got great stories to tell about student athletes at all of our universities, and not just what they're doing athletically, but what they're doing beyond the athletic field, in the classroom, after they graduate. And what we sometimes have allowed to happen is the 5 or 6 stories that aren't so good wind up dictating the picture of intercollegiate athletics. So if we take one and dones, for example, 5,500 approximately men's Division I basketball players, less than 10 a year are one and dones, but somehow that becomes the thing we talk about, not the outstanding basketball players get a degree in finance, graduate, and go to work for a major corporation and make a major contribution there. So I want, over the next couple of years during my tenure with the Board of Governors, to work with my colleagues here and others to tell great stories about what's happening, and not simply have the one-offs that aren't so good all the time dictate the picture that the world sees of intercollegiate athletics. So I think you're going to see us be more aggressive about some of the good things that are happening, and there are a lot of them that we just don't necessarily always convey in a good way.
I think one of the pieces of the NCAA's processes that gets missed often is that it is indeed a version of a representative democracy. And if you look at just Division I, there are these 350 or so schools that make decisions collectively. And anytime you have a collective decision-making process, it can be challenging and it can take a lot of time. But the issues are also complex, and I have, especially over the past 18 months or so, been extremely pleased with the work that the members have put in to streamline the governance structure, to involve many more practitioners, people that work on the ground and have a better understanding of how rules and policies impact students directly. And I've been pleased with the move toward the autonomy group having greater degrees of freedom to decide a handful of issues in a speedier way, by the way. And while that's been a challenging debate, even the fact that the members were in about an 18-month time able to change the whole nature of the decision-making structure in a really open and frank fashion was pretty heartening. So yeah, it can be a clumsy process because it's a democratic representative process. But on the other hand, these are individual universities with individual responsibilities, and there's really not another way to do that business. And there are people that like to say, well, why can't you work like the NFL? Well, the NFL has 30 teams. We have 19,000 teams. They have however many players they have, 30 times, I don't know what they have, 60-some players per team. We have, as Harris just said, 500,000 student athletes. The comparisons are frankly ludicrous, but they're ones that people can make because it's an easy comparison to make. We just are very, very different enterprises.
Greg Logan of New York Newsday for Dr. Emmert. What is the economic impact of this tournament here, and then annually of your organization here? And did you convey that to the governor? And would you ever consider moving the headquarters of this organization if they didn't come around?
Well, I may look to some of my folks for the economic impact assessment. Let's see. I don't see anybody in the room that knows the. Oh, Kathleen, there you are. What? So, without an economic multiplier, I think I read a number that was 700 million or something like that.
Yeah, you have the direct benefit and the indirect benefit.
Yeah.
And it is like 300 million times certain things, so it's certainly big. We update an economic analysis both on our impact being here in the city as well as the events that we hold in the city, and we're welcome to share the details of that at any time.
But it would be, if using any sort of conservative economic multiplier, it would be between $500 and $1 billion probably. And in answer to your question, first of all, let's be clear. Indiana and Indianapolis has been a really, really great host for the NCAA. And, people love being in the city. It's a great place to host an event like this and all the other events we do here. And so we feel very good about that. But that the decision of whether or not we moved wouldn't be solely mine. It'd be these gentlemen's and the rest of the board members that would have to make that decision. If I believed that we couldn't conduct our affairs in any place in a fashion that didn't prohibit discrimination against people for any number of reasons, then I would surely recommend that we move. I hope that we don't find ourselves in that place.
Tim Sullivan, Louisville Courier-Journal for Dr. Emmert. The recent story in the Chronicle of Higher Education cited one of your executives saying that 20 schools were under investigation for academic malfeasance or fraud. I found that number a little astounding. Is that typical, and do you think it's inherent in a system where the 20-hour rule seems to be unreasonable or unrealistic?
Well, first of all, it sounds like you and I agree on the 20-hour rule. I think one of the biggest challenges that we face, and I know my colleagues agree completely, is the time demands that are placed on student athletes right now. To be, especially within Division I, to be a successful Division I athlete and a successful student is a very demanding task, and in some cases it's too demanding, and we need to find ways to not just provide, but insist that they have more time to be students as well as student athletes. And I think there's general agreement around that. Figuring out how to do it is a challenge, but it's one of the things that's on the agenda for the council and then eventually for the board. The quote of 20 students under investigation, I think, skews the context just a little bit, because of the schools that are quote, under investigation, that could be as modest as someone having reported something that they didn't like and that being investigated to a full-blown investigation where there's some really serious allegations and some really serious evidence. So I wouldn't hear that as there are 20 schools that are enmeshed in great academic scandals. But we do get lots and lots of tips, if you will, and information about potential allegations, and our staff follows them up if there's any credible evidence to follow them up. And at that particular moment, there were about 20 of them going on around academics. I don't know, because I don't track that. It's not I keep them walled off from the investigative arm. I don't know where that stands right now, but I suspect it's well below that.
Mark Tracy from the New York Times, primarily for Dr. Emmert, although I'd love to hear other thoughts as well. It seems like there's several athletic departments that are citing kind of increased costs, whether associated with the new autonomy things or not, and looking potentially to cut programs. It's something that's already happened. At the same time, it seems like with few exceptions, those programs tend to be, quote, non-revenue sports as opposed to football and men's basketball and maybe a few others. At the same time, I know, Dr. Emmert, that you say, you know, at the convention you said, don't let the 3% distract you from the 97% of athletes that are in those, quote, non-revenue sports. Stipulated that you're a membership association and to some extent are supposed to be doing what, you know, those members want you to do. Do you feel like it's the NCAA's obligation to kind of try to encourage schools to try to cut costs if they have too many costs in ways other than eliminating opportunities for athletes in non-revenue sports?
Well, I'm gonna ask my colleagues to weigh in on that as well, because those decisions, as you're aware, play out on the campuses. And I've had to, in my career as a university president, make the decision to eliminate a program. We eliminated men's and women's swimming at the University of Washington in the midst of huge budget cuts, and some of those cuts were visited on the athletic department, and so I've had to make those hard decisions, and I know that that's not a fun thing to do. But having said that, the membership of the NCAA long ago established that one of their core principles was that college sports needed to be broad-based and that it needed to include a wide variety of opportunities for students, just as is mirrored on the academic side. So a university isn't just a place. It is a place that has a wide variety of programs and a wide variety of degree offerings, and college sports has historically been structured in a way to mimic that. And I, for one, think that ought to be continued, but we also have to be realistic about the financial pressures that many universities and colleges face. So I'll let these gentlemen talk about that.
Sure. Let me say, and everybody knows that a minority of universities in D1 finish any year in the black, and certainly no universities in D2 or D3 come anywhere near that. My university is one of the fortunate ones that does finish in the black in terms of athletics, and they return a significant amount back to the provost, which we in turn distribute for financial need for our non-athletic students. But the new costs are in fact considerable, and I could tell you that we're not cutting that aid that's going to come from athletics back to academics, but our AD is in the process of delaying projects that he and coaches consider necessary at the university, but that's, I think, the right price to pay. I think our commitment to spend more money on our student athletes, coupled with his commitment to, on an annual basis, return money to our academic enterprise. So we're not looking at cutting programs. I would find that a detestable, distasteful thing. I'm glad we don't have to face that. But I do think that those are the kinds of conversations, those are the trade-offs that are being made in universities every day.
I think one of the challenges we have in public higher education is that in many, many states, there's a disinvestment in higher education, not just in Kansas, but across the country we're seeing this happen. And as that occurs, people are asking questions. Do we need to spend X dollars out of some sort of general fund supporting a Division I, Division II, Division III athletic program? And so I think those conversations are occurring because money is getting tighter and tighter. So that's one thing. So some of those considerations are also putting some pressure on the number of sports that we have. The other thing we all have to decide, do we want to have a smaller number of student athletes that are better supported versus, in a way, a larger number of participants that may not be supported with the coaching, staff quality, the facilities that we might like. I think every individual institution is going to have to make that particular decision, but it would be naive of me to say that there's going to be some schools out there that may not elect to say, we're going to support a smaller number of student athletes in a more appropriate fashion, we feel, and that may mean some sports move to club level sports as opposed to intercollegiate athletic sports. We think, though, at the bottom line, it's important to look out for student athlete well-being, and so I think the decisions we made were appropriate, and they leave it up to us as presidents and athletic directors to determine how to best do those, and it's going to be different at every institution.
Dr. Everett, I'm Maureen Hayden. I'm a State House reporter here in Indianapolis, so have been closely following how RFRA has unfolded.
Do you have news for us?
They're working it out.
All right.
Could you tell me more about the conversation you had with Indiana Governor Mike Pence? And specifically, what was his response back to you when you expressed your concerns? And why do you think that he and legislative leaders ignored you and many, many other officials here in Indianapolis?
Well, I can't answer the latter part of your question. You have to address it to them. I think we saw in the governor's comments and in this morning's press conference with the leaders of the two chambers that they all grossly underestimated, to be polite, the reaction of the citizens of Indiana. And why that should occur, I don't know. That's up to somebody else, someone like you, to ascertain. In terms of my conversations with any of the political leaders in the community, they wanted to know what my concerns were. They wanted me to explain them more fully, and I talked about the conversations I'd had with our leadership and the seriousness with which universities and colleges take issues like this. These are not sidebar issues for a university. These go right at the heart of who a university is and what they stand for. And I made that really clear, and they seemed to hear the message well, and they were trying to explain, as they did publicly, what the bill was about and what it wasn't about, and trying to make the case for the fact that there was no intention for it to be discriminatory. And now they're taking the actions that they're taking, and we all hope that we all up here hope that they get there.
We have time for one last question in the back. Yes, him.
Hi, I'm Charlie Pierce from Granlund.com. This is for Dr. Emmert. Two of the schools in the Final Four this year, Michigan State and Duke, are residents of states in which laws very similar to the one in Indiana and emanating from some of the same organizations are under review and are under passage in the legislature, in the respective state legislatures right now. You've made your statement. What are you planning to do about this on an institution-by-institution basis when you have coaches and administrators who are going to have to face, especially at public universities, who are going to have to face this issue going down the road as the backlash from which this has emanated gets stronger?
Well, first of all, as President Schultz said, we need to, at the upcoming meeting of the Board of Governors and the Division I Board and D2 and 3 also, have conversations about what's the level of involvement, what's the appropriate role for a National Athletic Association in public policy issues at a state level. There obviously have been those issues that where the association has decided to take strong positions. The Confederate flag issue is a great example of that. where the association acted. The complexity of these Religious Freedom Restoration Act laws is that they all are slightly variable. They are all in specific contexts of a state or the federal government where there may or may not be other civil rights protections that are in place. And in many ways, the real status of those laws is contingent upon how they are applied and what the state's jurists do in terms of rendering opinions on what can and cannot occur within that state. So it's not, unfortunately, it's not something for which any of us can come up with a really clear, simple scenario that we will or will not tolerate X, Y, or Z. It's more complex, and it's going to take a lot of thought and a lot of care. And I think what we've seen in the past, now you're just getting my political science 101. What we've seen in the past couple of weeks in Arkansas and Georgia, where states were doing similar things and they stopped at the last moment, I suspect, though I don't know, was informed by what they were watching in Indiana. And I suspect, but don't know, but suspect that will be true around the country, that there has been a sea change of public opinion on issues of gay rights around America over the past decade or two, and it's being reflected in the reaction of citizens to a variety of laws, and that was unequivocally the case here.
Okay, thank you very much. We are out of time. Thank you for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you all. You guys are great.